Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to L&D's first speaker event of the year. We are really excited that you're all here and that we have an amazing guest with us today. This is our first speaker event ever. So we hope you enjoy, and I'm going to let Monica introduce our wonderful speaker.
Hi, my name is Monica. I'm the Vice President of L&DMatter, and to everybody who is able to come today, thank you so much again. I am so excited for this event today. So today we have um, Dr. Elissa Conlon, who is a speech-language pathologist, aphasia researcher, and IMSA alum. And we're just gonna have just a great conversation about about helping people with disabilities, about speech language pathology, and just about fun IMSA stories and everything in between. So I'm really excited to introduce Elissa. So I guess to kick things off, Elissa, if you could just kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little about yourself and what got you interested in this field, that would be really great.
Sure. Thank you so much, Monica and Ahana. I am honored to be here with you all, and it's so nice to see your faces and just to connect to current IMSA students. Um, uh, as Monica said, I am a speech language pathologist, not doctor. I have my master's degree. You have a master's to practice in speech pathology, but that's okay. And I work at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, which is a rehabilitation and research hospital in Chicago. And we have satellite locations in other areas throughout the state of Illinois, and actually some neighboring Midwestern states as well. So if you've ever seen one of our locations, they're all connected. And let's see, what else can I tell you about myself? I work in the Center for Aphasia Research and Treatment, so I'm a research clinician, and I can talk a little bit more about what that means, but I started practicing at the bedside, and I work primarily with patients who have neurologically based diagnoses, often people who are stroke survivors or who have had a traumatic brain injury. Maybe they have a neurodegenerative disease or have had a brain tumor resection. So mainly people who are recovering from things related to injuries or changes in the brain. I'll stop there. That's a lot of talking to start. I'll let you chew on that. I guess I should also probably say that I am a proud graduate of IMSA and class of 1999. So sounds like a long time ago when I say it out loud now.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving us the introduction about yourself. We have around 10 questions for you today. So our first one is, what got you interested in helping people with disabilities?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to study abroad. And so I majored in a foreign language, Spanish. I know, sorry, not French. And I studied abroad in Ecuador. And as a part of my program, we got to do a month-long independent study project where we worked with a local organization. It was kind of an anthropological-based program. So the idea was to partner and go in and learn everything you could about this organization and how it worked within the community that it served. And so I ended up being matched with an organization that helped people with disabilities in very rural areas. And it was this really interesting community-based model where because these were more remote areas, it was really hard for the people living there to get into like the city to get the care that they needed or see the clinicians that would be appropriate. And so what this organization did was try to close that gap by training health promoters in these communities. So people that the community members themselves selected to do the training And the organization would provide that training based on the needs of the individuals with disabilities in that community. And so it was a very like person-centered model. And I just found it to be very inspiring because it empowered, first of all, the people with disabilities themselves. They were at the center of this very positive program that brought resources to their community. There actually ended up being a micro lending element of it as well. So starting with the person with a disability at the center in a positive way, empowering them to choose who they wanted from the community to then be providing the services that they needed to improve and access the things in life that they wanted to be able to access. So that was a very inspiring experience. And when I came back to college, for my senior year, I was looking for a volunteer opportunity. I wanted to give back. I felt like I had learned so much, and I was coming back to what I saw as a place of a lot of opportunity and privilege. And so I was looking for a volunteering opportunity and ended up connecting with a local speech language pathologist who worked in the local public schools. And there were many, many Spanish speaking students who were receiving language services and they needed language models. So she was looking for people to just come in and, you know, read stories in Spanish and interact with. These were young kids, preschool, kindergarten, first grade, to just speak Spanish and provide that additional stimulation. And it fit right in my schedule. And um, I started volunteering, and as I did, I also learned more about her work and the field of speech language pathology. I really didn't know anything about it prior to then, and I was just, you know, really excited about it. It felt like something that kind of fit to the point where I thought, wow, this is a job. Like you can get paid for this. This is I love doing this. And to see the students make progress and respond to the stimulation, and it was just really powerful to be a part of that. So, and then that speech pathologist actually became my mentor. And beyond the volunteering opportunity, she sort of took me in under her wing. I went to college in Minnesota, and she actually was not only practicing in the community and in the public schools, but she partnered with um, the University of Minnesota speech department and helped with different research initiatives. And so she started bringing me to meetings and community events, and that really sent me on this path toward this career. I have questions for you guys. I'm like so interested in how people came to this club, which wasn't around when I was at IMSA, and just, yeah, how this formed and how, what brings you all to this interest. You could chat, or you could, I'm sorry, I'm going rogue. You can also keep asking me questions.
No, yeah, for sure. So I know I've also done a lot of talking, so I'd really love to open this up to some of the ambassadors to ask some other questions too.
So personally for me, I was really interested in this club, mainly because my brother actually has autism. So I wanted to like kind of give back and help other kids that are in the same boat as my brother. And I hope like with my own personal experience that I can also assist other people around the nation, the world. And I think that's just something that I really want to do in the future as well. Um, so yeah, I don't really have a question, but that's just how I got here.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Natalie. Thank you.
All right, so I guess what got you to Shirley Ryan, I guess from there, and kind of the switch from you know, like you said, doing more bedside things to doing more research.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I finished my master's program, I had trained. I wasn't quite sure what part of the field I wanted to go into, because you can practice as a speech pathologist in many different settings, and you can work with, many different patient or client groups. And I loved so many things. Like many IMSA kids, I'm sure you guys can relate to this. I like to do a little bit of lots of different things. And I was like that in grad school too. And when I graduated, I thought, I'm not quite sure where I want to land. And so I applied for jobs sort of broadly. And I ended up starting my practice in public schools. I got a job with a program that I did, a bilingual speech pathology program with my Spanish background. And I got to work within a school district that was starting a two-way bilingual immersion program, and they wanted my input in terms of brain development and language acquisition. And so that seemed like a really neat way to apply what I had learned in meaningful work. So I started there and I practiced for 2 years in the public schools. But in my free time, I just kept reading about adult neuro stuff. And I had a whole class about aphasia, which I loved. And for anyone who isn't familiar with that term, aphasia is a language diagnosis or disorder that happens when someone has damage to the language areas and or networks in the brain. So for someone with aphasia, they still know exactly what they want to say. They're having their complete thoughts and feelings, but they may not be able to express themselves with their words, may have a trouble getting their thoughts out. Or, I mean, it can impact any or all parts of language. So they're speaking as well as understanding, reading, and or writing. So I found aphasia fascinating. And I lived out of state. I was in Oregon and I was ready to move back to the Chicago area where my family was. And so I thought, well, now's a good time. Why not make multiple transitions? And I applied for jobs in medical settings and neuro-focused opportunities. And the the job at what was then Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, RIC, was a really good fit. And so I started there on then it was called like the stroke unit. It expanded over time to serve, broader patient populations. But I started there bedside full time with all adults. I would float sometimes and treat on the pediatric floor too, but mainly adults. And I did that work for years, and I started to get really interested in patient and family education, and particularly around helping patients with aphasia or communication impairments learn how to communicate effectively again with their family members and friends. So I started developing and giving training to family and friends of our patients before they would go home, to try to help people adjust and learn what they needed to in order to be able to still be able to chat and connect the way that they wanted to, despite the language challenges. Um, and that sort of got me more interested in, I was doing a lot of reading on the current research about the best ways to do that and evidence-based practices. And Shirley Ryan Ability Lab is, as I said, a rehabilitation and research hospital. So it's very focused on evidence-based practice, staying up on the literature. And we're doing a lot of our own research in-house, which we then try to get right into patient care as quickly as possible. And so I learned that there was a research study starting in our aphasia center, and they were looking for a speech pathologist to help deliver the therapy. And so I applied to do that part-time, and then did end up helping with that study, delivering the therapy. And I was doing kind of a split position, so going between these two worlds, it was really challenging sometimes to wear those two hats at the same time and be going back and forth, because they really operate differently. Clinical care has totally different timelines and expectations. Maybe like average inpatient stay is about 3 weeks. versus, you know, the grant that I was working on was a 5-year project. So you can just imagine how you'd be kind of thinking on different levels for those two different things. But I absolutely loved it. And the research, you know, just enriched my practice. I brought back a lot of things to share with my teammates, and vice versa. Then I was able to bring the clinical on the ground voice to my research team. So it worked really well. And then at some point, there were other opportunities in the research center that arose, and I then embraced those, and I'm now working full time in the Aphasia Center. So not bedside treatment as much anymore. But in our center, it's therapy-based studies, and so I still get to do treatment and training directly with patients, nowadays all over Zoom, which is really interesting, but works so much better than we ever thought it could. So that's how I got where I am now.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story. We've read a lot about your work and the accomplishments you've gotten as a result of your amazing work. And so,
Thank
specifically,
you.
the Traveler Humanitarian Prize, you want to expand a little bit more about like your work for that and certain things that might have led up to that?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much. I feel really privileged to do this work, you guys. I feel like one of those really lucky adults who I really do enjoy what I do. So the Kabiller Award was such a huge honor, and it meant, yeah, what it did was it offered an opportunity to pursue a project that would be good for the patients and for our organization. The idea is to promote the humanitarian side of our culture as an organization. And some colleagues nominated me. I feel like that was like the biggest honor of all because I have so much respect for them. And part of why they nominated me was because of all the how do I say, education and advocacy that I've been doing within our organization. The project I got to do was basically all about access, and specifically access for patients with communication challenges or impairments. So not just people with aphasia, but anybody. Maybe they speak a different primary language, or they have a different level of health literacy that makes it hard to understand sometimes what the clinicians or doctors are saying to them, or, you know, to tell the clinical team what they need. The thing is, you know, I imagine in L&D Matters, you talk about accommodations and accessibility in different ways. And in our organization and most rehabilitation in general, we have done a really good job of learning how to accommodate people with physical disabilities. Most practitioners get a lot of training. Like, I know how to safely help transfer somebody who needs support with their balance or mobility. But we don't do as good a job when it comes to people who need communication accommodations. So, and the missing link is education, to empower staff to know what they can and should be doing to make things easier for a patient who has autism, for example, or a patient who maybe had a brain injury and has trouble concentrating or remembering things. There are lots of things that we can do as communication partners to make things easier and to make information more accessible to all patients, regardless of what they've got going on with their communication. And so my thought was to try to provide that kind of education to staff. And so that's what I did. I worked with my nursing colleagues, nurses and patient care technicians. And I chose them as a group because during patient inpatient stays, they're the staff who spend the most time really with our patients. And so I thought if they can communicate more effectively, that's going to have a really big impact on our patients' experiences while they're in our care. And so that's what I did. I worked on, our hospital is divided into sort of different specialized centers, innovation centers they're called. And I work primarily in the Brain Innovation Center. It's 3 levels with primarily neurologically based, serving people with neurologically based diagnoses. Brain-based diagnoses. And so I worked with the nursing staff on those 3 floors and provided this education and then hands-on coaching, and all the while getting feedback from them too, because I have so much respect for my nursing colleagues, and I knew that they'd know what they needed. So I started with some focus groups, found out kind of how they thought things were going, what would be helpful. And I'm a certified trainer. I pursued training in this area. So I kind of tailored the education to them. And then I got to tag along with them during patient care situations, and I'd, you know, try to give pointers or demonstrate things in real time to help them practice and get more comfortable doing these things. And we also created resources, communication boards in different languages, because that's one of the things staff said that they really wanted to have handy, that, you know, um, when patients are admitted to our hospital, usually they come in, like, let's say a patient is admitted today on a Tuesday afternoon. They're not going to have their therapy evaluations until the following day, until Wednesday. So in the interim, it's all nursing staff that's working with and communicating with these patients before a speech pathologist like me comes in and does an evaluation and says, oh, okay, here are all the things that could benefit this patient. I'm going to leave all these tools in the room, or, create some personalized things perhaps. In the interim, it's nursing staff that have to kind of figure it out and work with that patient. So that's another reason they were saying, well, we need tools on hand that we can just grab when a new patient comes in, to be able to help them, especially with at least, their basic needs, and making sure that they're comfortable and those basic needs are met. Thank you for that question. That was, I will say too, I think one of the most fun parts of, I loved the coaching because it got me back on the floor and got me tagging along and seeing patients and hanging out with my nursing friends. But at the end, I did focus groups again, to just hear how it went. Was there more that people needed? What did they think? And the nurses and patient care technicians told all these really heartwarming, inspiring stories about what a difference it made to be able to communicate more clearly and effectively with patients, and to know what they could do to support, because they said, they always knew, it's like, your patient knows what they want to say and they just can't get it out, or there's some breakdown happening and it's confusing. And unless you know these strategies and have the tools, you're sort of at a loss as a staff member. And everybody who does this kind of work, they're there for the patients. They love, being able to help. And so it's really hard on us when we feel like we're not, or we're not, there's a breakdown. And so they told these stories about, like, I'll give you 2 quick ones. And you guys, I'm watching all of you, just raise your hand or do like an emoji if I'm talking too long, or, pause me. Okay. Okay, 2 quick stories. One was this nurse that I used to work with on the floor actually said that she and the resident, a new patient came in, and they were going through kind of all the questions to admit the patient. There's just, kind of all this paperwork and things you need to go through with a new patient to get them set up. And one of the things that we ask about is patient wishes. So, for example, like a do not resuscitate order, do not intubate. Those are the kinds of things that a patient can indicate. Especially if status might change during care. These are things that are a patient's right to determine, and so it's important for their providers to know what that patient wants. So, and when I say status change, I'm talking about like if somebody becomes unstable and, you know, their health is dramatically declining, there are lots of measures that we can take medically, obviously, to intervene and sustain someone's life. But some people really don't want that. And so that's always a part of our admitting process to ask about that, right? And this nurse said they had a patient with aphasia come in, and this patient, sometimes when you have aphasia, your words get kind of mixed up. You make paraphasic errors, substitutions, and that can include really important and seemingly simple things like yes and no. Meaning you might ask me, is your name Elissa? And in my head, I'm thinking, yeah. And I go, no. Or I might go, no. And it can be really confusing. And when you're asking important questions, you know, as a provider like this, you know, what are your wishes about this very important kind of decision? You need to know what that person is really meaning, yes or no. And so I had taught the nurses different ways to confirm these responses, to check in more than one way so that they could be more confident. And I don't have my badge with me, but I made these little cards that say yes, no, I don't know on them, and they fit in the back of our badges. So sometimes when a patient is not able to say the word they want, they might be able to read it and point to it to indicate more clearly. So the nurse said, Elissa, I'm listening to her, and you know, we ask her the question, and at first she's saying no, but she's doing this. And she's like, I knew that I had to confirm in different ways. And so I asked a different way, and it still wasn't clear. And then she said, I brought my badge up, and it was the yes, no. And we said, do you want these interventions if you need them? And she said, pointed to yes. And the nurse said, okay, looks like you're saying yes. Is that correct? Can you show me again? Yes. And the woman confirmed in like 3 different ways that she, yes, would want those interventions. And the nurse was like kind of teared up, and I teared up because we were both like, I mean, we could have misunderstood as an organization and thought that she didn't want these interventions when really she would. And don't worry, there are all kinds of other safeguards and things with paperwork, and lots of times people establish this ahead of time. But I tell that story just to highlight what important conversations happen, and how important effective communication is, to really understand what our patients think and need and want, to serve them properly. And then the second story is a little bit quicker, also with a patient with aphasia, who came in, and she was an older woman, and she had trouble both understanding and getting her words out. And she had a husband who often was basically kind of always at her bedside, but then on her second night there, he had to go home for some things. And the nursing staff wanted to help this patient with bathing, you know, to take a shower. And she hadn't really been able to do that since she was in the hospital because everything was just medically focused. And these are the kinds of comfort care things that are so important too. And the nursing staff went in, and the woman was just really scared, really upset. You know, her husband wasn't there, who had been kind of communicating on her behalf and made her feel more secure. And she was just feeling really overwhelmed. And the nurse and the patient care technician went in, and they said, you know, hi, Mrs. So-and-so, we want to help you with a shower, you know, to make you more comfortable. And the patient was like, no, 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 and kind of refusing. And the nurse said that she grabbed her paper and her marker, and she started writing it down because she thought, well, Elissa said maybe if she can't understand when I say it, she might be able to read it more easily. And so she starts writing it down, and the patient's kind of like, you know, and they're pointing to the bathroom, and she's like, and it looked like she's saying, okay. So then they go to help her into the bathroom. And once they got in there, the woman got upset again and kind of seemed like a little bit confused because they're starting to try to help her undress, and it's uncomfortable. And so they stopped, and showed the word again and kind of demonstrated in the shower. And the woman, she looked like she was understanding more, but she started crying. And the nurse said, she just took a moment, because a lot of my education is not just the strategies, it's also put ourselves in our patient's shoes. And she told the patient, I know you know exactly what you're thinking. It must be scary and hard to understand. There's so much going on. I am so sorry, you know? And she just said, do you want a hug? And she like reached out like this. And the woman kind of was like, and leaned in, and they had this hug, and she sort of cried it out. And then she calmed down, and the nurse was like, okay, we want to help you get a shower. We think it'll help you feel better, but you don't have to if you don't want to, it's up to you. And the woman was kind of like, she said, the nurse said she actually like kind of sighed and was like, okay, and then they helped her get a shower. And she felt so much better, being clean, and now having these two staff members that she felt more comfortable with. And they then helped her, back into bed. And they said that her husband came in later and was just so thankful, and she said the rest of the time that woman was there, they had this kind of special connection. So that was really neat to me, because it wasn't just the communication piece, it also showed the power of how we can connect more strongly. And, the award was around compassion. And I think when we can communicate with each other, that's when we're able to show and receive compassion, because we sort of understand better on both sides. Thank you for that question.
So I have a question about the communication mechanisms that you use, and like the ones that you develop that are personalized for people. What exactly different kinds of mechanisms you use, like what are the most common ones, and what does the learning curve look like, not just for the users but for the family that they have to communicate with?
Oh, I love that question. This will let me get into my like clinical side. So the way that I teach these strategies is based on training that comes from the Aphasia Institute of Toronto, which is a wonderful organization. If you want to check them out, they do a lot of education and advocacy around effective communication. So what the Aphasia Institute says is, when we're communicating, there are things we can do to help the information on the way in, help someone understand, and then information on the way out, help that person express things. And so that's kind of how the strategies are broken down. So when you think about your language system, to get information in, it's either you hear auditory information and process it, right? Or you read something visually. To get it out, it's either talking or writing or typing nowadays, right? And then there are visual strategies, which are all of the above. And you can tell I do this all the time. You can see me gesturing as I talk. It's like hard to turn it off sometimes. But if I do this, maybe a little better, you know what I'm talking about, and I don't need any words, right? So that's a gestural kind of communication. In the hospital setting, we have different levels of tools and supports that go from what we call kind of low tech to higher tech. And all of these things require that the staff understands how to use them with patients, and that the patient learns how to use them too, which is part of my job as a speech pathologist. That's what we work on in therapy, getting them used to these tools and knowing how to use them. So some examples of low tech are communication boards. I wonder if I have one handy, actually. Let me just look real quick. Okay, I do. So for example, you might see a board like this that has basic need kind of messages on it. And you see how it has pictures and like big bold words, so that maybe if a person can't read this, they can see this picture and they understand when I say, do you need to go to the bathroom? Even if my words sound like gibberish, when I do this, they know what I'm talking about. I give that context. Similarly, my patient themselves can grab that board and go, right? And I know that they want something to eat or drink. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's kind of low tech because it's a static thing. We have like a pain scale here, you know, again, written yes, no. There are lots of different things that are, you know, basic needs that might be specific to that setting. Oh, did I go too fast? Things like seeing your doctor, temperature, are you hot or cold, bed positioning, TV, etc. So those are high frequency messages that might come up in the context of being an inpatient in the hospital. So we have a low tech board like this that's just available. And it can range depending on what a patient is able to do. It might be only 4 things on the page at a time because it might be too distracting or confusing if there's too much on a page. So that's what I mean too by individualizing it. We kind of tailor that to what the patient, kind of where they are, what level they are, what's going to work for them. And then we actually have a technology center in-house. I worked there for a while too. And that department, we're really lucky to have a standalone department like that because the clinicians who work there, speech pathologists and occupational therapists, are specialized and trained in creating those kind of low-tech supports. And I might personalize it. Like if you were my patient, I would learn, you know, who are the people in your family, and we put their names in your book or on your board, probably with their picture too, if we could. Your hobbies, you know, things that you might want to talk about, your favorite foods, where you've traveled, your work background, etc. The tech center staff not only makes those lower tech things, but we also work with augmentative and alternative communication devices. So you might have heard AAC, and it's basically devices that are speech generating devices where, and now with like smart technology on your phone or on an iPad, there are lots of apps that do this too, where if you, it might look kind of like this. You might have an array with different messages on your screen. And when I press it, my phone says, I need to use the bathroom. I want a chocolate milkshake. That would be on mine for sure. And again, similarly, the tech center staff will modify what the display looks like. And the OTs, their job is really interesting and cool. They work especially on access also. So they might do visual things. Sometimes a patient can have like a field cut, or they might have trouble attending or seeing things on one side of the screen. So we kind of modify what it looks like. And then we might use different ways for them to access. So someone might, depending on their physical abilities, they may or may not be able to just like point to something and touch it on their screen. So sometimes we use switches, and the OT might put it in the place where the patient has the most control. So it could be at their right elbow. It could be next to the inside of their left knee. Could be, we have what's called a sip and puff. It's like a little straw. So patients who may have had a higher spinal cord injury, for example, but they still have respiratory control, they maybe aren't able to move any of their limbs, but they can blow and suck in. And that is a way that they could choose, like on their device, we'd set it up where the device scans through those messages. So it'll like hit this row, this row, this row, and I go, and it chooses this row, and then it goes message to message, and that's what I chose, and then it'll say that message. Those are just some examples. There's such a wide range. There's eye gaze. People can use their eye movements to like a mouse tracker on a screen. There's a head mouse where there's like this little reflective dot that we put on glasses or like right on the forehead, and then the person can select like this. They're all different kinds of options, and it's really neat to see the tech center staff is like so creative and skilled at setting things up so that, you know, patients can access and communicate maximally.
Thank you so much for that response. I'm curious as to, like, even in an inclusive environment like the one that you're creating, if and when you come across like ableism, what does it look like and how do you deal with it?
That's a wonderful question too. Thank you for asking that. I think you all probably know the answer is yes. Unfortunately, that's pretty pervasive, even in a place that's dedicated to working with and for people with disabilities. I will say I have encountered it definitely on the individual level where a patient is interacting with is doing things, maybe underestimating that individual or not giving them a chance. I think in terms of communication, and it comes from a place of care and good intention. As someone who's worked with people with aphasia over the years, oftentimes family members or friends will jump in and try to speak for that person. And I will tell you honestly, early in my career, I wasn't quite sure how to navigate that because I wanted to make sure that that family member felt respected, as did the person with aphasia. And I didn't want to shut down communication. And so what I've evolved into over time is being kind of direct, but still kind. I think in a sort of Midwestern way, I might say to someone, "Oh, thank you so much. I can tell you really want to help. I know that so-and-so knows what they want to say. So it's my job to help, support them to try. Let's give them a little more space and time to give that a try. Let's see how good I am at my job." I try to take it back on myself, kind of. I use humor whenever I can. And also I try to create space for that person with the disability to do the same thing if possible. I think that's even better than me saying something about it. So I might say, "Oh, thank you so much for trying to help. Let's give a little, and then stop and just see what happens." Because sometimes that patient might go, to their family member. And I think that that's more powerful than me saying it. And then I try to help with the language and just kind of label what's going on, you know. So that's on the individual level. I think there are things on a structural, systemic level too. In any organization, there's a history and there's an ethos. And for example, now I work in a research center, the Aphasia Center, and we have community groups for our community members with aphasia that we facilitate. We also are running language intervention studies all the time. And we're working to try to figure out ways to have our community members' voices more integrated from the get-go. I think the really traditional process is for researchers to propose an idea and you submit a grant proposal and you get the funding, and it's sort of based on what's out there in science already, what's been done, what has yet to be done, what are the questions that remain unanswered. And as a field and as researchers, I think disability researchers more generally were realizing and reckoning with the clear fact that it's nothing about me without me, right? We shouldn't be just proposing these studies without going to people with aphasia to say, is this important to you? What are your priorities? What do you wish somebody was studying? So we're working on that. And it's it takes time, especially because there are these well-worn paths for, that we have like NIH grants that support this work, federally funded grants. And there's been a long history of these pipelines that are very formal, and it's well established in terms of what the requirements are. And, if you think of someone with a language impairment, I think of those forms alone would be such a huge barrier. And so researchers are trying to figure out how best to partner with people with aphasia to get their perspective and involvement in from the earliest possible stages. And I will say too, I think at the funding level, the good news is that more and more grant reviewers are looking for that kind of involvement. They're looking for ways that you can show that whatever you're going to study can have positive impact on people's quality of life. They want real life impact. So I think hopefully that's a good combination of some real realities that I've experienced and some things that are hopeful in terms of how things I think are improving.
I know you talked about progress and like really positive things right now, but I kind of just wanted to know a little bit about like the problems, I guess, or a little like you did touch on it like at the beginning, but kind of what's currently stopping like the field from making progress or like improving the lives of neurodivergent individuals.
Yeah. Yes, let's talk about that more. I think time and money are still really prioritized and can be seen as barriers because you think about a grant deadline, for example, and if somebody wants to, let's say, hold multiple focus groups with a neurodivergent group that they're hoping to serve with a kind of intervention study, that's going to take time, right? And that's prior to getting the funding. And so you have to figure out, okay, how do I support that time? And not only my time, let's say, as the researcher, also those individuals, right? If I'm going to ask these people to give their time and their input, how do I support that for them too? And then I do think that, a big challenge is knowledge and strategies, again, around communication, because oftentimes a neurologically divergent individual or neurologically different, I actually would prefer to say, person, they might not access information the same way, and they might not express information the same way. And so to facilitate those kinds of connections, people need to have those skills. They need to have access to the tools to be able to set things up so that everybody can participate as meaningfully as possible. So, that's part of what really motivates me in the ongoing education work. I didn't talk about this before. Maybe I should have, but leading up to the Kabiller Award, I think one of the other things my colleagues, one of the other reasons they tapped me for it is that I started this program within our organization to train clinicians. So I was really fortunate. I pursued and got internal funding to go and be certified as a trainer in supportive communication principles and strategies. And then I started kind of doing that on the micro level, as I said, with patients and families and my teammates. And then I was like, this has to go bigger. We have to be spreading this in a more sort of trickle down way because this isn't going fast enough. And so I applied to start a program within our professional development structure where clinicians could sign up and they would have some supported time to come and learn this stuff and then be guided on how to do this in their practice. So physical therapists, occupational therapists. Now I have wheelchair seating and positioning therapists. I have an orthotist. People from all different parts of the hospital are starting to engage in this so that they can adjust how they communicate to whatever their patient needs, you know. My orthotist told me this great story of working with a patient who had a traumatic brain injury that really impacted how he was able to concentrate and take things in. And we talked about that in the training. And he was like, I realized, Elissa, I'd been throwing way too much at this guy all at once. So I started to kind of break things down and I was showing him visually, and then I would wait and give him time to process, wait and give him time to respond. I wouldn't give him too many choices at once, just like 2 or 3 things. And he was like, I thought it would slow things down, but it actually really sped things up. And then I was able to really make him an effective orthosis that he liked and wore because we got all the important information. So, you know, I think that there are these challenges that arise from maybe lack of knowledge or training. And so I think the more we can innovate around education, not only when people are already practicing, but possibly in their training programs, the better.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Speaking of innovation, I know we only have like 7 minutes left. I have one question. Where do you see like the future of disability advocacy going in your field at least?
Well, one thing I love about speech pathology, and I'm not recruiting, but kind of think about it, is that you can go so many different directions with it. And so there are lots of opportunities for advocacy depending on where you practice. And I think that the role of any clinician or researcher for that matter is to do everything we can to empower the people we serve. That's how I see our job. And so I think the more we listen to the communities of people who are neurologically different, physically different, anyone who has any kind of difference or disability, the better we'll understand what is most meaningful to work toward to help them feel more empowered in the ways that they want to be empowered. So in future directions, I think it's going to be a lot more about listening rather than just doing things that are prescriptive or what we think is best. To humbly walk beside people and think about using whatever privileges, gifts, training, education that we've been afforded to help them pursue what they want to pursue.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I guess as a kind of last thing, which really does not have much to do with speech pathology or disability advocacy, I and I think the rest of us here are just curious to know, like, what were some of your favorite IMSA memories?
Yes.
You know, and favorite parts about IMSA when you were a student.
I was hoping we would get to that question still. Thank you for asking that, Monica. All of these questions have been so wonderful, you guys. This is just such a pleasure. So some of my favorite IMSA memories were around, you know, the first time that I got there. I got to do Excel. So I was in that summer program before starting. I don't know if you still have that or not, but
yeah, we do.
Yeah, and I had been a summer adventures kid too, so I did like an IMSA summer camp before coming to IMSA. That's how I got introduced to IMSA. And just getting to meet so many other really interesting and interested kids was so exciting. And I think of just like all the creative things, you know, staying up late in the dorms, you know, getting up to mischief pranks, Yeah, if we had more time, guys, too bad we're winding down. But, you know, I think there's just so much creativity. And I also found in my time anyway, there was a lot of acceptance. You know, I think that IMSA is a diverse community in different ways. And I think people are generally really kind and work to lift each other up. It really is a collaborative place. I think the faculty is amazing. I mean, when I went to college, I also was really lucky to have devoted, wonderful teachers. And it's a good thing because I got really spoiled by the IMSA faculty. They're so dedicated and so knowledgeable and passionate. And that just created a learning environment that, you know, we can feel kind of burned out. You know, you might be up late doing your work and feel like you're kind of dragging. I know finals are going to come soon. But there's a lot of support at your fingertips. And I feel like IMSA is always kind of open to feedback. It's always trying to get better. Um, and that's really special. So, and I think I shared with the board members when we were planning this that I went to one of my reunions not this past summer, the summer before. And it was so genuinely fun to see my classmates. You're connecting to a really special network. And people, in my experience, people continue to use their powers for good. So it was really neat to come together in the reunion and talk with my former classmates who are doing such inspiring things. So yeah, I think that I know that there are challenges, and I know that we all push ourselves really hard, and that can weigh us down. But I think, you know, be mindful, keep taking care of yourselves and of each other, and remember that you have all these resources available to you, not only in the faculty, but in alumni, um, and in each other. And know that, you know, as you get out there and go forward and leave IMSA, you still remain connected to this really cool community. And I'll tell you, you know, when I got to college, friends of mine there, that was their first time having roommates and starting to make friends at that level. And I did make friends that became like family to me in college. I already had some friends like that from IMSA. And so that's really special too. It's like we get extra opportunities for that, you know, other people don't have.
Thank you so much for that response. I think that was a very heartwarming note to end on. With that, those are all of the questions that we had for you today. Thank you so much for talking with us for a whole hour. I'm sure that everyone who came learned a lot. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting me.
It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Nice to see you all. I'm sure that the board can share my contact information if people have follow-up questions. I will say one more thing. If any of you are thinking about a career path, you know, like Natalie, what you shared in the very beginning, you know, thinking about ways to sort of give back long-term, my little pearls of wisdom would be keep paying attention to what sort of lights you up inside, kind of what you're good at and what brings you joy, and keep listening to the community, looking for those needs where you can combine the two, where you could maybe serve a need by doing things that you happen to be good at and enjoy. And if you're not sure what those are yet, that is totally fine because I did not know. Certainly not when I graduated IMSA. I wasn't totally sure when I graduated college. So you've got time, but just keep kind of listening, keep volunteering, keep connecting to organizations to check things out. You know, you might be able to shadow once COVID and in-person stuff is happening again. Maybe over Zoom, you could shadow some things. So try things out and see what fits for you. Okay, I'll stop there. I know we're at time.